What's up, everyone? This is Ryan here, and you are watching episode 25, I believe, of my live stream Q&A. I do have to apologize because today I'm bloody tired. I'll talk about why in a couple of minutes, but yeah, I do apologize. I might not be super coherent today, but that's okay. I figure even on the days when my head's not 100%, I can sometimes answer a few questions, so we'll see how we do today. Before we continue, I would like to thank the following people for supporting me on Patreon, and we have two new supporters for this month. That includes Seth Keegan, Shan, Tina Fredericks, Tony Jones Jr., Trevor Halvorson, Bassam Helal, Nanotech, Shadow, Mr. Bidwell, Sushil Chanda, Elad Stavi, Sophia, and Graham Herseg. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that somewhat correctly. And yeah, I'd just like to thank the following people, or those people, for supporting me on Patreon. I don't have too many announcements, but I do have one big one. Over the past 2 months or so, approximately, basically what I've been doing is I've been working on an introductory ebook for the Android platform. So my idea with this ebook was to basically create a resource where it was something that's easy for beginners to sort of get started with, but also will sort of expose and overview quite a large number of topics in a simple and general way. And kind of what I mean by that is I feel like a lot of beginner material, what they tend to do is they'll get you started with the basics, and they'll show you the basics of an Android project and the life cycle and all that kind of stuff. But what it doesn't really give you is it doesn't really give you a point to sort of figure out, okay, well, how do I actually start building architectures? What's a simple way to get started with like a 3-layer architecture or something like that? How should I talk to databases or network? Should I do it asynchronously? What is asynchronous? Just basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to cover a little bit of everything of the sort of, I would say, topics that generally get left out in beginner material. So anyways, it's about 50 pages long, and what I will do is because I'm tired, I totally forgot to put a link in the description box to it, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And but yeah, that's basically why I'm exhausted. So I launched the book 2 days ago, and because I had an error with my distribution software, I didn't sleep a whole lot last night trying to figure this stupid thing out. Alright, if you would like to support me, and if you would like to check out what will hopefully be a fairly decent introductory Android ebook, I just pasted the link into my description box, and I'm going to fire it into the chat. Alright, anyways, that's my commercial for today. So yeah, if you'd like to support me, consider buying my shit. Alright, anyways, let's get started here. I have to apologize. I had a question from one of the people in the Slack channel, which was about error handling, and the question was from John. And basically, John, I'm not sure if you're watching, but I'm kind of in a weird spot in my own programming, or my own sort of architecture and style, where I'm trying to figure out basically how to use RxJava to model events in a system, and basically create like an object which, like an event object which contains various different sort of potential states at a given point of a particular feature. I know this is advanced shit. I can't really phrase it in simple terms. And longer story shorter, what I'm saying is I'm revising the way I handle errors in my own application. So I will show you like a couple hints that I like to use, but I can't show you, I think, what you were looking for, which is like, okay, what's like a good way to create an error management system using like a class that contains all the errors and stuff like that. And to be perfectly honest, I think that's a great idea, but let me just really quickly walk people through how I kind of handled errors before. Just how I even sort of determine I don't know. Let me just walk you through some code. And it's not going to be great. I do want to revisit this later, but I'm going to keep this pretty quick. And I hope that's actually showing up. My OBS Studio is showing my code view as just a black screen, so that's really not good. Yeah. Okay, OBS Studio, what are you doing? That's not normal. That's really annoying. Okay. Well, we're off to a good start, folks. I don't know why OBS Studio is just not displaying my capture. Oh. Okay, it's kind of working there. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. That was bloody weird. I checked the stream. I see you guys could see that too. Okay, cool. Wow. I've had it like lag a little bit, but that's new and improved level of bullshit. Anyway, sorry, I'm swearing a lot today. So let's get started here. What was I going to talk about? Error handling. So one thing I like to do, what I wanted to show you is not so much a system for representing errors in a class, because I don't have that code handy. But what I can do is show you sort of a way to, I'm trying to think. You can figure out your errors based on the responses from the database, and hopefully that might be some, or a network service, REST API, anything like that. And hopefully that might be kind of useful. So what am I talking about? So what I will do, basically, the lesson I'm trying to teach here is that one way I figure out, this is how I actually design my errors and how I figure out when to sort of fire them, and it's based on test-driven development. And what I'll do is I'll walk you through one of my unit testing classes. And my goal is to kind of show you how you can go from like errors, messages from your services. So when I say service, I'm thinking GitHub, I'm thinking databases, that kind of stuff. GitHub, REST. Sorry, I'm really tired and this is going to be ugly, but I'm thinking of that stuff there. And let's just go to the code because I apparently can't speak English today. So basically what I do is, let's say we're in a particular feature of an application. So in this case, I'm just in the alarm list feature of POS Trainer. And all that really does is it just sort of it just displays a list of alarm objects. I'm just pulling it up right now. And what it'll do is it talks to a Realm database to retrieve those alarms. So I just want to show you a glimpse of the screen really quick just so you can have some context as to what I'm talking about. So this is the part of the app that I have open. It's just like a list of these alarm objects. So whatever, just wanted to show you the context of what I'm talking about. So when I was writing the test for that particular feature or activity, this particular, I'll just call it a feature for now, talks to an alarm source, which is secretly a Realm database, but because I'm doing a good job with coding to an interface, it's an interface. And basically, at sort of different times, how this works is that if we go into the actual service itself, where is it? If I go into the alarm database, what you'll see is that if things are successful, what it's going to do is it's going to use its RxJava magic to basically emit that alarm. It's going to give me the alarm that I'm looking for, or in this case, I think it's a list of alarms. Yeah. And so basically how our RxJava works is we get this. If you use the create method, we get this emitter object. And longer story shorter, the way that I sort of I return this callback is to call something on this emitter. Longer story shorter, how this relates to errors is that let's say, for example, I request from my database a particular error. So here I'm saying I'm creating a Realm query, and I'm saying get me an error equal to, get me an alarm equal to this reminder ID here, just like so. And then it's either going to say, hey, here's your alarm. It's going to find the alarm based on the ID, or it's going to throw an exception. So in this case, I've just hard-coded an exception. This is pretty bad. So basically the part which I think John wanted to know about is creating a class or an enum to represent these things, which is basically better than what I'm doing here, which is why I was so, which is what I was talking about earlier. Anyway, so how this kind of works is, in a perfect world, I think, yeah, you should absolutely create like a class or an enum. I would probably do a class, but just because I don't generally work with enums, but that's not an educated opinion. If you prefer enums, you can do that. And so anyways, so when we fire an exception, within my unit test class, I sort of have those cases covered. And what do I mean by that? I mean the cases, like for example, one test says, when we successfully retrieve alarms, do this, and when we don't find any alarms, do this. And then the last one is for each sort of operation to say a database or a network, I'm going to test the different potential paths that it can take in my unit test. So in this case, oh, shut up, stupid phone. In this case, I have sort of 3 different things that can happen. I can return a list of alarms, I can get no alarms, or I can get an error. And so what I've done is I've written a unit test for each of those instances. So generally within this test, I'll decide what error message I want to send. Unfortunately, I don't. Let's see here. Empty exception. I don't think this unit test is written properly. That's the best when you're doing a demo and the code is screwed up. Anyways, yeah, here's just an example. So in this particular case, this is an error I sort of throw when I can't talk to the database. Anyways, longer story shorter, the last thing I'll show you is that, so as I said, we've got a service and it can either return success or it can say there's no items, or it can throw an error, throw an exception. And I cover each of those potential paths, I'll say, in a unit test. And each of these unit tests correspond to a particular RxJava callback. So what I mean by that is if I go to my alarm list presenter now, so as we'll see, I've got this get alarm list use case, and that's going to retrieve a list of alarms. And that particular use case or operation, basically, when it's successful on get alarm list success, then I test sorry. Then I'm testing what happens in on success within my Rx. Whoa, don't do that, stupid computer. I'm testing what's successful within my RxJava on next, or when I throw an error, this error will correspond to this particular error unit test. So the test when I'm testing when something goes wrong. So on get alarms error right here. So anyways, I feel like that was super incoherent and used a bunch of jargon, but I do apologize. And hopefully that kind of gives some information about error handling and how you can sort of integrate it with unit testing and RxJava. Yeah, and that's basically it. That's one of the ways that RxJava makes error handling really simply. So I know I totally didn't answer your question, John, but hopefully that is useful nonetheless, and I'm going to carry on. All right. Yeah, you can absolutely check my messages, Martin. So for a lot of people, I just had a comment about a YouTube message. I am really damn busy, so I try to get to your messages eventually, but I get a lot of messages in a week and I have a lot of stuff to do. And so it can take me quite a few days to get back to you. Anyways, so I've got a question here about unit testing. Bonjour, Darrell. All right, so Ravi asks, can I quickly explain unit testing on Android? I can absolutely do that. Am I in full screen mode? Nope. All right, so let's talk about unit testing. So first off, what is... so when I was learning testing on Android, the biggest issue I had is that I would look up different resources and I'd be like, okay, what is unit testing? And they would talk about it, but they would never really explain what the hell a unit is. What is a unit test? And that was really frustrating to me because like the word's getting thrown around, but no one's actually defining it. So what is a unit test? Now, what I'm going to be doing, as always, is I'm sharing you my understanding. I consider myself to be an intermediate Java developer, so, you know, take everything with a grain of salt, but hopefully this will clear things up for you. So what is a unit? What is a unit test? So essentially, a test of a unit of code. So the first thing we need to know when we're talking about unit tests is that there's many different ways to test your application. There's, as you've noticed probably, there's instrumentation testing, which just, I don't know why they choose the word instrument. I would have preferred the word device testing, but whatever. But yeah, you can test things on your device. You can use Espresso, which you mentioned in the comment, which is to test the user interface. I currently don't use Espresso just because I do really intensive unit test suites, and I also keep my view devoid of logic pretty much, but anyways, that's a digression. Let's talk about unit testing. So when I say unit, what I want you to think of is a block of code, or several chunks of code, or just, it could almost be anything from a method to even a module of an application. It's just a unit, and there's different scenarios where you'll want to test different different size units. The thing about this is that there's a lot of different opinions and approaches to unit testing. So what I will explain now is what works for me. So in my experience and opinion, when you're writing your unit tests, you only want to be testing a single method. So each unit test is one method. Each unit is a method. So we could almost rename my tests as like method tests. Now, what am I actually testing is the important part. What I'm testing is the behavior of my application of a given class or unit based on the inputs that go in and the result of those inputs. So what I'll do is I'm going to show you a diagram first, and then we'll go into code and we'll talk about it. But I want to set up like a visual sort of reference here. Just give me one moment. Where did I put it? Okay. Now, again, this is going to kind of lightly reference RxJava, and I realize that some people don't use RxJava. The thing about it is whether you're using RxJava or not, when you're talking to, say, like a database or REST API or some kind of service, you're just going to need to have some way of handling different kinds of responses. So in RxJava, that's really easy. We just have on success, on empty, on error kind of stuff, or there's different types of observables. But let's say you don't have RxJava, you would probably be thinking of like try catch. So, so you try some particular call on a database, for example, and if it fails, you catch specific errors, and that'll look something like this. But basically what I'm trying to get at here is what I'm testing with my unit tests. So the most important classes, in my opinion, to test are your presenters or your view models or your classes that have lots of logic. So in those classes, basically every time they get an input from the, I'm hoping you know what model view presenter is, otherwise this might be a little ambiguous, but basically what happens was when an event happens, like someone clicks the user interface, that message is going to get sent to a logic class, which is going to call, we're going to skip this use case part because that's clean architecture, but our presenter or our logic classes or our decision-making classes, I want to test what happens when they make their calls to different services. I feel like I used a bunch of big words and that probably didn't help. So let's go to the code, and I'm going to look at, where is it? All right. So the code that I have in front of me is available in the description box, and it is from my Recycler View 2017 tutorial. In that tutorial video, you're going to find a section on writing unit tests and a deeper explanation than I'll give you now. So I would suggest you go watch that video afterwards, because I explain the basics of unit testing, and I even write a couple on camera. But for now, basically what we have here, I forgot what I was going to explain, didn't I? So we have in the middle a controller, which is a logic class, and we have a view, which the basically is going to talk to the controller in the event of like a user input, like the user just clicks a button, it's going to talk to the controller. And then it's going to talk to whatever data source. So what I want you to think of is, let's say in Pos Trainer, for example, when I click the plus button to create a new alarm, that message starts in the view, goes to the presenter, and then the presenter is going to say to some database, hey, make this new alarm. And then the database is either going to say the alarm's made, or it's going to say something messed up. So what I'm trying to do is like ground what I'm talking about. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write tests based on that behavior, what I expect to happen. So within my controller unit test, within this repository, for example, I have a test, and this is a unit test here. So each of these methods that are annotated with test in this class, those are unit tests. I'll generally call this class, when I'm writing my unit tests within the test package of a new Android project, Android Studio does this automatically. It'll generate this test package or source set, and this is where you will put your unit tests, and I'll generally call them, for example, if I go to Pos Trainer, I'll generally call them stuff like the name of the class I'm testing, which in this case is alarm list presenter, and then test at the end. And then, so let's go back to, where is it? Recycler View demo. Anyways, so within this unit test, I basically create mocks or sort of like fake versions of the view and the data source I'm talking to. So when you see data source, just think a database. And then what we're doing is we create an actual implementation of the class we are testing, which in this case is a controller. And then all we're doing here, and I won't go through the finer details just because I've got the tutorial on it. You can go watch that. But basically all we're doing is for each unit test, I've given you like a little sort of explanation. For each unit test, we set up whatever sort of preconditions a test needs. So for example, if I'm, let's say I have an app which is talking to Facebook's API, and we're testing a valid email address is an easy example. I'm going to have one test for like a valid email input and then another test for an invalid input. And basically what we do is we set up our test data, and we call the method that we're testing, and then we test sort of the responses. We mock the responses, and from that we sort of determine the behavior of our classes. So I'm hoping that makes sense. The last thing I will say is let me show you how the methods within my presenters within Pause Trainer correlate to the unit tests, which is something I mentioned earlier, but I just want to go over it again. So get alarms. Get alarm list. Sorry, just let me find the appropriate thing here. I'm just trying to figure out why there's duplicates. Okay. Yeah, so basically the last thing I'll say is that so what I will do when I'm writing tests is I will apply test-driven development, and how that basically works is that I use the tests to determine the structure or the implementation of the actual code the actual class that I'm testing. So in this case we have alarm presenter test, and I'm testing this alarm list presenter. Within alarm list presenter, we have some functionality to test. So when the activity first loads, it requests a list of alarms from the database. Depending on what the database says, it will give me 3 different responses potentially. So in onNext, it will give me a list of alarms if the database successfully retrieves it. In onError, it will give me an error. And in onComplete, it'll just say, hey, I didn't find any data. Each of these corresponds to a unit test. So for example, let's see, we're testing on get alarm list. So I feel like this test is wrong, and this one is right down here. That's really irritating me, but on get alarms error. So in this, what I'm trying to tell you is, so in this particular case, I wrote this test first. So this is the error case. We're saying I'm calling, I don't know how to phrase it, but as you can see here, the result of this unit test is to say to the view, this error has occurred, and if I go to the actual implementation, you'll see that it calls that particular method. All right, I'm going to move on because I'm, pretty damn tired today, and I'm having trouble explaining stuff, to be honest. But hopefully that was useful. I kind of showed you just a general overview of unit testing. Go watch the recorded video because I'm much more coherent in that, and I actually write the tests live. Anyways, but the gist of it is you're trying to test the behavior of your classes, essentially. Okay. What have I got here? So I've got a question from Ryan Brown. So he's re-downloading Android Studio, and when he imports the my projects from GitHub, they're full of errors. So I would ask, can you give me any more information than that? Like what is the name of the Gradle errors that you're getting? It could be, yeah, it could be a number of things. I guess, you know, one solution could be me updating my Gradle, but yeah. So this is a question from let's see here. Question from Tina. Again, this is on unit testing. I'll just copy and paste the question. That's a little easier. So I'm just going to be really only giving an opinion here. So I've never actually heard of this 3-line rule, but I think I follow it. So this appears to be one method of approaching unit tests, which is setup, action to trigger, and verification. So in essence, I believe this is what I do. So if I go back to the code, and I do apologize today, my brain's just not finding the words very well. Okay. So the way that I write my unit tests is, let me go to the, let's see here, recycler view tutorial. And I think I wrote out essentially a process that I use. So you set up the data. So this is sort of how to write a unit test, I guess. And so the way I like to approach it is I set up whatever mock data or objects I need to execute a given test. So in this case, I'm testing when the user clicks the new list item button in this random thing. So what I'm doing is I first set up my mock data source. So I follow the setup. Then I call the actual, I guess what this methodology would say, I trigger the action. This is the action that I'm actually testing down here. So I would call the action is the actual method that you are testing, the unit you are testing from a real version of the class. And then I verify the result of that method based on the given setup. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm initially saying, hey, data source, I want you to return a new item. So essentially this is a success. And then I'm testing what happens when the data source returns a successful response, which should be to add this new list item to the view. So that is, in essence, how I try to set up my unit tests. So you could say set up action verify. I'm curious as to where you read about that. That is essentially what I do. I'm not saying I invented it, but anyways. Oh, it's a 3-line. Oh, I see what you mean. So focusing on if it's more than 3 lines, then it's testing more than one thing. You see, well, I'm trying to think about that. In this particular case, it is 3 lines, but I do have tests where let me think about that for a moment. I don't know. See, the one exception I would say is that, for example, if I go to my tests within POS Trainer, there's certain scenarios where I'm only testing one single method. But that single method will talk to multiple different services. So in this case, we're talking to an alarm manager and an alarm source. So an alarm source is a database. Alarm manager is system services. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about that more. whether it's, you see, I wouldn't view that as an issue. I don't know. That's an interesting perspective. I understand the idea because like basically the most important thing you want to do is you don't want your unit tests to be super expansive, and that's one thing that is important. You want to be testing almost the smallest pieces possible of your implementation. So if you have unit test classes that are just enormous and you're testing all this different stuff, there's probably something going on. But yeah, I have no idea whether you should always do 3 lines. A lot of my tests end up with 3 lines, but not all of my tests talk to one single data source, so I'm not 100% sure there. All right. Oh, the exception might be... Okay, if the exception's for setup, then that would make sense. Yeah. Yeah, that would make more sense. Yeah, absolutely in reading the comment. So let's see here. So I've got a question from Orlanok, who's asking if I can show snippets or hints that I use in Android Studio. So are you asking like what are some just general hints I use in Android Studio? Could you rephrase that question and I'll try and answer it. Okay, I can answer that one in the meantime. This is an interesting question. So, what was your name? Alexander. Oh, I'm so tired today. Like I'm losing my train of thought every couple of minutes, and it's frustrating. And then I'm getting frustrated. And then that's not helping at all, because one very important thing I learned is that the more stressed out you are, the less you think in your prefrontal cortex. So essentially, the more stressed out you are, the dumber you are. And so it's a funny feedback loop where I get irritated that I'm not using my words properly, and then that makes me more stressed out. And then I talk less efficiently. And anyways, just random babbling, I apologize. So this question is, so how should you treat adapters in MVP? Now, of course, this depends entirely on the kind of adapter we're talking about. I'm going to assume you're talking about something like a recycler view adapter or a list view adapter, like an adapter which is responsible for managing some part of the view, essentially. I'm assuming you're not talking about like a REST adapter or something. So where should you put that in Model View Presenter? And this is something or how should you treat it in Model View Presenter? And this is something that I've thought about quite a bit. So my personal recommendation is to treat an adapter as part of the view. Whoa. So let's go to, what should I go to today? Let's do room demo. I don't even care. Just randomly pick one. So you'll notice in most of my repositories that if you want to find where the recycler view adapter is, you can open up the view. In this case, the view is a fragment. This repository is room demo 2017, again in the description box. And so I like to put my adapters in the view. And there's a couple of reasons why I do that. It'd be better if I could list them in a reasonable order, but I'll just kind of give them as they come into my brain. So number one, if you pull your adapter, so assuming your view is either a fragment or an activity, if you pull your adapter out of that, you need to pass in context, or you need to pass in a layout inflator. And that can be a little bit problematic. You need to be very careful about passing context and inflators and stuff like that to random extraneous classes. And the reason for that is you can get memory leaks, especially if you're like creating and managing multiple adapters, and that can get ugly really quickly. So that's the first reason why I would consider it putting it in the view. Now, just from a broader perspective, so let me tackle this from a different way. So how do we determine if a class belongs in a particular layer? As a general question, and I think this will answer the adapter question. By determining its responsibilities by looking at what it does, its implementation in bracket, implementation. So in order to determine whether something belongs in the model, the viewer, or the presenter, we have to ask, okay, what are this class's responsibilities? So let's go ahead and open up the implementation. So you can also look at documentation when you're figuring this stuff out, but in this case, we'll look at documentation. So, so there's a couple things. So at first you might think it kind of is part of the model because it needs to sort of get given a data set. I'm trying to think, how can I sort of phrase this intelligently? You know, let's just go to the documentation. That'll be easier. All right, so what I've got open is just the documentation. So let's go to the super class. Where is it? Okay, so here's the recycler view adapter class, and you can also look at other adapters, but I'm just picking on the recycler view. So when you read the documentation, it basically says it provides binding to a data set displayed within a recycler view. So it provides binding between a view and a data set. So essentially, like, I don't even know. I had this big notes page on this. What are adapters? Sorry, just give me one moment. See if I can find it. I'm trying to give you reasons why it's part of the view, but they're just not entering my brain. Okay. All right, here it is. So basically the responsibilities, if we look at an adapter based on responsibilities, in this case, so a recycler view adapter or a view adapter, it has two responsibilities. So it manages a collection of data and it talks to the view, essentially. Okay. So it's essentially like a bridge between the data and the UI, but it's not responsible. Here's the key point. It's not responsible for creating the data. It's not responsible for manipulating the data. What it's responsible for is it's a bridge between a data set and the view. So in that sense, it doesn't really belong in the model, in my opinion. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, there are other just practical reasons why I like to have it within the view. So for example, when it's contained as a nested class within the view, when an on-click event happens, I don't have to deal with this callback hell that occurs when you have an outside adapter. Because when your adapter is outside of the view, when a click event happens, you need like an adapter within the view holder that talks to, an interface within the view holder, and then an interface in the adapter which talks to the view. And you get this sort of callback BS going on that's really annoying to deal with. Whereas if you put the adapter right into the view in this case, then you can just talk directly to the presenter or controller or whichever kind of thing. So that's basically why I consider adapters to be part of the view. Hopefully that makes sense. I found it just practically it works better. And yeah, that was pretty bad. I'm only going to answer one more question because my brain is just not on it today. I do apologize about that, but oh well. Yeah, we'll see. Not sure. Question from the top. Well, so I have a question from the top, which is actors and use cases. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not familiar with the term actor. I am familiar with clean architecture and use cases or interactors. But I haven't heard the term actor, the technical word, so unfortunately I can't answer that question. I'm assuming that probably means like entities or something. The problem is like, you know, what use case means in clean architecture is different from other scenarios. So yeah, anyways, unfortunately I can't answer that question. I could talk about use cases, but I'm not sure what the deal with actors is here. Oh, okay. I think I'll probably end on this question. And hopefully I can make something coherent out of it. Amon. All right. So Amon asks. I'm just going to copy and paste it because I'm lazy. So Amon asks, and this is in follow-up to my unit test babbling. So if you're familiar with specific behavior of your app, can you skip the unit test of that code? So basically, if you did a login method many times, do you need to write a test for it if you know it'll work 100%? Well, here's the thing, Amon. So when do we need to write a unit test? When is, like, most of all, what is the most important scenarios when we need to write a unit test? Those are scenarios when we have what I would call logic gates. That's totally just a term I made up. I'm sure there's a proper technical term, but just different events. I think of these things as logic cases, essentially. So let's take like a really simple scenario. I've got an app and it's talking to a database. So in the absolute minimum, in my opinion, you must write unit tests for when the database operations, each operation of the database succeeds and when it fails. And in a lot of cases, I think you should also write a test for when it returns no data, which is different from an error. It's different from an exception. It might just be an empty database. So why do we want to write tests for each of those different scenarios? And what is the purpose there? We're testing what happens what is the end result of the rest of the app in a given scenario. And so how to maybe kind of ground that, let's just say we have, this is the view, so a fragment, hopefully you're familiar with architecture, this won't work very well if you're not, but we've got a view, and we'll just call this like the presenter, this section, this is a presenter, and this is, we'll skip this middle part and just talk about services. So each time the user clicks a button, it starts in the view, it goes to the logic class, the presenter or the controller, and then that thing's going to talk to whatever service or database it needs to talk to. So what you want to test with your unit tests is you set up that event, so you sort of fake a click, it goes to the presenter, and then you want to test all of the potential responses and how to respond to those responses within the test. So what I would say to you is, it's what you're asking is a particular scenario where if you're in a part of your code that you know will 100% work, you probably don't need to write a test for it, but like for example, you don't need to write a unit test if you're calling, we don't need to test something like a text view dot set text. We don't need to test something like that, look, if setting the text on a text view fails and it's not just like a null pointer exception, if it's just like a giant operating system crash, yeah, we don't need to write a unit test for that. But anytime the flow, the logic gates of an application change and there can be different sort of paths that it can follow, that's when you need to be testing. And that's when you want to write a test for each potential thing that can happen. So really what I'm saying here is, if we go back to my fancy little diagram, what I will say is that there's scenarios where you might have to talk to multiple different services, and so you kind of want to, yeah, I'm basically repeating myself, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. So yeah, in a situation where you know 100% what your code is going to do, that wouldn't necessitate a unit test, but the way that you determine when you need one is when the flow of the application diverges, essentially. And in that case, you pretty much should write a unit test. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I think you should always write unit tests in that scenario. So anyways, hopefully that kind of answers the question. All right. So I'm going to wait another 2 minutes for a quick question, and then I'm going to call it a day there because, yep. Yeah, if you've liked the show so far, please hit the like button down below. But I do apologize. It's been a crappy episode. My brain is not working super well today. I'm just reading some of the comments here about adapters. So Darrell is saying I kind of see. I think what Darrell is making the point that by putting the let's see here, where's the view? By containing the adapter within the view, you essentially reach, I think what he's talking about is situations like this, when you end up having logic within the view. So that is it's a valid point. I don't particularly. I don't know. I think it's one of there might be a better way of handling it, but this is one of those scenarios where, yeah, it's not 100% model view presenter, but I do kind of. Oh, sorry, I was in code mode. This is what I believe Dechel was talking about. So situations where you end up having logic within your view because you have the adapter. And that is a valid point. The main reason I put it in the view is I just find it very convenient to be able to talk directly to the presenter, and then everything's sort of in one single spot. But you do result with a little bit of logic in here. Anyways, that's going to be all for now. I'm exhausted. Thank you for watching. Hopefully that was somewhat useful to some people. And yeah, that's all for now.